Did you know that in some areas of the United States, Mexicans were more likely to be lynched than Africans were? Now, in K through 12, we usually learn about American lynching and only hear about the African American story. Now, that's with good reason, because they were absolutely lynched in the highest numbers across the country. But at the time, their population was also much larger because of the institution of slavery. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Mexican population was nowhere near what it is today. And so when we look at the numbers of lynching, by and large, Africans were lynched at higher numbers. However, in places like Texas, there were some areas where Mexicans were more likely to be lynched than Africans when you look at it relative to the population. Now, the best way to explain this is, for instance, if we have two populations, right? We have a population of 300 Africans and we have a population of 50 Mexicans. Now, of the African population, 25 of those 300 are going to be lynched and 25 of the 50 Mexicans are going to be lynched. It's the exact same number being lynched, but relative to the population, the Mexicans are more in danger because they are being lynched at a higher rate than Africans are. Now, those are made-up numbers, so don't quote me on those. It was merely to explain how it is that there could be Mexicans that were lynched at higher rates than Africans, even though we have way more documentation of Africans being lynched than Mexicans. Now, why is it that we don't learn about this? Why is it that it's been some, big secret that Mexicans were also lynched in the United States? And not only were they also lynched, but they were the second largest minority group lynched behind African Americans. That seems worthy of teaching, right? One of the reasons why this happens is because there isn't, and there wasn't for many years, one centralized archive for Mexican lynching the way there is for African lynching. The NAACP has amazing records that they have kept, and there is no equivalent for Hispanics. However, scholarship is really growing on this topic right now, and I have 3 amazing recommendations for y'all. The first is this one that you can see behind me. It's called Forgotten Dead by William Kerrigan and Clive Webb, and they were the first to really start exploring this topic. My second recommendation is The Lynching of Mexicans in the Texas Borderlands by Nicolas Villanueva Jr. And the third recommendation is The Injustice Never Leaves You by Mónica Muñoz Martinez.
Did you learn about the largest mass lynching in United States history that was ordered by Abraham Lincoln? In the 1850s, the Dakota people of Minnesota suffered from an unjust treaty system that stripped them of their land, culture, and ways of life. They were forced on reservations and promised goods, but these goods were often withheld. The frustrated Dakota attacked hundreds of white settlers who they felt were encroaching on their ancestral lands. After multiple battles during the Dakota War, the Dakota surrendered. 303 Dakota men were sentenced to death. Lincoln commuted 264 sentences, but ordered the rest hanged. In 1862, 38 Dakota men were hanged in front of a crowd of 4,000. Because of the hasty trial, some men were mistakenly hanged and others were innocent. One man said this after his sentencing. After the hanging, one Dakota chief had some of his skin removed and the bodies were dug up for physicians to study. Dr. William Mayo displayed a skeleton of a Dakota man in his home. Did you ever learn about this mass lynching in school?
This is a very nuanced, complicated piece of American history, and I'm going to try to just give you a skeletal outline of it. And I want to say there are several websites that do an excellent job of explaining what happened. But this all takes part during what is known as the Dakota War in Minnesota. Settlers had stripped hunting grounds of Native Americans in order to plant crops. The government had made some treaties, and as usual, Native Americans didn't have a whole lot of choice in the treaty. It was given to them and they were to sign it. So there were some tensions over that. The government was supposed to pay the Native American money, and at one point those payments were very late coming in. Just a great deal of frustration. And it wound up with the Dakota declaring war on the United States, and it kind of went from there. Some settlers were killed, but over 300 Native Americans were taken captive And Lincoln signed off for about 36 of those to be put to death. There was a mass hanging in Minnesota. So that's a huge part of the turbulent history between whites and Native people. Like I said, it's a lot more nuanced than I'm able to explain in a brief video, but there's plenty of information online. Just you can Google Dakota Wars and you'll get the whole story there. Very, very complicated piece of history. And as usual, when a group comes in like whites from Europe, they overtake the land, overtake the people, then tell the people what they're going to do, and occasionally the people push back, and that's basically what happened here.
I think to myself, if I were up here in front of you right now, and this is going to become very important as I move into the other slides, if I stomped a puppy to death out here, up here, just a little puppy, and stomped it right here to death in front of you, most of you would need therapy. And I would be arrested probably faster than killing a black man for killing a puppy. Now I want you to look at this photo very closely, and I want you to see who's in it. More important than the man hanging, because you got to understand the lynchings that occurred in America happened after slavery, not during. Thousands of lynchings happened after slavery, because this is a reaction to white fear of what we would do once freed. But we didn't create a vigilante group to take out white people, but they did create a vigilante group to take us out now that we're free. See, that happened after slavery. They were called the what? The Ku Klux Klan. They don't wear hoods anymore. They wear suits. But they're alive and well all over the world. So look at who's in the picture. I want you to look at this little girl in particular. You can't see her closely, but she's actually grimacing, like smirking. Now, remember, let's go back to the puppy concept here. She would be loathed and torn up probably if this was a puppy, which means he's less than that, because she's not disturbed. This little girl is not disturbed by this, but she should be, shouldn't she? People always ask me, they go, Joy, what was the impact on white people? There it is, right there. Can't feel any empathy for him. None, zero, zip. There's a little one back here, even smaller. Because whatever she's been taught or told, socialized to believe, makes him no longer human. That's the greatest danger to white people, is that they can't feel it. And there's a reason why white people can't feel what we're talking about. My God, what would you then feel? It's tough. So I've got to believe, oh, it's all over now. It's not my fault. I don't benefit. It's not a big deal. Let's move on. It's not all of those things. But we don't say that to Jewish people. I dare you. But you have to understand, when you unearth this one, that's what we did to our children.